When we think about something that Canada stands out compared to the rest of the world, we think about how we welcome multiculturalism and feel pride in our diverse society. What we don't notice is that Indigenous people who have been on this very land for thousands of years, have continuously felt trauma up to this day. The misconceptions of Indigenous people still continue, as many don't know Canada's dark history of horrid treatment against the Indigenous people. Throughout Canadian history, they have suffered long-lasting pain that has continued through multiple generations. One of the main forms of cultural genocide, the residential schools, were the main trigger towards the continuing intergenerational trauma. The main role of the residential school was to assimilate Indigenous kids to European ways. In order for the government to reach this goal of complete cultural genocide, Aboriginal kids all over the country attended the school forcefully and unwittingly by the law. Through residential schools, Indigenous kids were prevented from having their traditional cultures, languages, and spirituality that define their own identity. Kids were often subject to severe punishments, as the line between punishment and abuse was frequently crossed. They suffered rape, torture, and even death in their times at the residential school. And the horror was that their parents didn't know about it. These forms of abuse were experienced by Indigenous kids every day and marked the start of the ongoing intergenerational trauma. A study by the First Nations Information Government Center concluded that 1 in 4 teenagers who had a parent that attended residential schools considered suicides and had significantly higher rates of binge drinking and drug usage compared to 1 in 10 teenagers that did not. This leads to poverty and decrease of mental health that we as a nation simply have completely neglected. If we look at the greater picture, intergenerational trauma doesn't only come from residential schools. As the First Nations Regional Health Survey, the only First Nation governed national health survey in Canada, concluded that 75% of all First Nations people living in Canada was victim to intergenerational trauma. As an individual, I think we should spread awareness about this horrid dark history Canada has gone through and allow the Indigenous people to feel that we are on their side. Ryan Moran, in a panel discussion in Gord Downey's Secret Path documentary, describes how many of the Indigenous people failed to speak up, as this was something they kept bottled up for 60, 70, 80, sometimes 90 years because early childhood traumas want to deny it. Due to this trauma, there is a failure for the general public to understand how cruel residential schools were due to its lack of awareness continuing the intergenerational trauma. A quote by Timothy B. Tyson said, "If there is to be reconciliation, first there must be truth. In order for truth as an individual, we should take pride and raise awareness for the Indigenous people so that we can take a stand against the uncontrollable trauma current Indigenous people are facing in our country. Finally, as a nation, we should also give full support towards the victim of these traumas. The Truth and Reconciliation Calls to Action gives us numerous changes that can end intergenerational trauma now. For example, number 18 states, to make federal, provincial, territorial, and Aboriginal governments recognize that the physical and mental health that Indigenous people suffered was a direct of previous Canadian policies, including the residential schools, and implement healthcare rights of Aboriginal people. Also, number 66 states, establish multi-year funding for community-based youth organizations to deliver programs on reconciliation and set up a national network to share information and practices to treat mental health. These are some of the examples we as a nation should call to action to stop the haunting intergenerational trauma that still exists today. As Jesse Wentz states, we are really just in the beginning of the process. We are still at the beginning of the truth stage despite all the testimony. As our proud nation is completely capable of making a difference, it's time we move forward as a nation.